Welcome everybody to Asia Business Connect, a community of entrepreneurs and experts joined together to discuss all things Asia. Many thanks to those joining us live today, as well as those watching on demand afterwards. My name is Michael, and I will be your host today. We have quite a treat for you today. We'll be discussing Asian business cultures and how your cultural knowledge can help your business thrive in Asia. Now, as a business development consultancy that specializes in helping Western companies in the Far East, we get asked this very often. What's the business culture like out there? What do I need to be aware of before I go into a meeting in Japan, Korea, China? And frankly, the answer to this is very tough. You could say, well, just be polite and respectful and you'll be fine. And that's true. That's really true. But usually it applies to sort of the surface level, first impression stuff. But the deeper you go into the relationship with your Asian customer and partner, the more complex the cultural context gets, and the more it would benefit you to understand where they're coming from on a slightly deeper level. So today we've decided to invite our in-house experts, dialing in today from Shanghai, Tokyo, and Seoul, so that they can tell their tales, tell some stories, and help us get a bit closer to understanding Asian business cultures. And notice I say cultures, plural, as you will see that despite some common threads throughout the region, it's really about the key differences. Asia definitely isn't a monolith in terms of culture. So now, before we invite our first speaker, just a bit of housekeeping. We'll have 3 short talks on what our experts think are some of the most unique, interesting aspects of the business culture in their respective geographies. After that, we will invite all the speakers back to participate in a Q&A session. So please use your chat function in the feed that you're watching this on to send us questions, and we'll try to address them as best we can. We'll share our email addresses at the very end, so if there are things that you're still curious about and we couldn't get to them, feel free to reach out. So, and hopefully we should wrap the whole thing within an hour. Now, so with that, I would like to welcome our first speaker, Zhao from our China office. Zhao, welcome, and thank you for joining. Please introduce yourself briefly and take it away.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, good morning, good evening, everyone, no matter where you are. Great to meet you here. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about Chinese business culture from my own experience. I've been working with Interlink for 15 years, so I've seen some changes. So let's begin. When asked to talk about Chinese business culture, I thought it would be easy because I live in it. When I was told I have only 10 minutes, it became nerve-wracking because there's so much to cover. I will make it simple. I would like to paint a picture of my routine, having attended so many business meetings with or without my clients. It's a sort of a quick collection of day-to-day things that are obvious to me, and we go through it as a sales cycle every day. But I find my Western clients are always baffled with. Okay, number one, when we set up this business meeting, it's not unheard of that meeting gets rescheduled or cancelled approaching the date. In fact, never expect to have the meeting a fixed time more than 2 weeks prior to the date. This is the opposite of Japan, I think. Number two, the meeting attendee list is always a mystery. You never know who is coming to the meeting. Sometimes it's just the engineers, sometimes it's 50 engineers, sometimes it's the CTO coming in as well. You never know. However, by end of the meeting, we can always request to set up a WeChat group with all the attendees in it. Number three, we go into a first meeting, exchange info, do our pitch, answer some questions, and so on. Most of the time, our client will come out of a meeting feeling extremely positive, and there will be a deal. That's because Chinese business people, they never say no straight to your face. It normally takes a few rounds of exchanges for my clients to realize that there's no deal. Number four, when wrapping up a meeting, there's always an exchange of WeChat info. So by end of the meeting, everyone will scan each other's WeChat QR code, forming a WeChat group. I would strongly recommend people getting a WeChat account if you're doing business with China. Emails are kind of useless for daily business communications. Number five, let's say there's an interest after initial contact. We then go into usual process of NDA, evaluation agreements, things like that. But Chinese contracts will only become effective when chopped or stamped. If you haven't seen one of those, I went through the procedure of getting one of those here. It looks like this, and it's normally kept in the safe. For larger companies, the procedure is more complicated. So if you are waiting for your contract to be chopped, be patient, wait for it to go through the procedure. And then most of the times, the contract will be validated only chopped. If you want to see what a chopped contract looks like, you can Google picture it. So that's number five. And number six, now suppose we've agreed all the evaluation results, provided quotation, and so on, and we should be in good place. Not so fast. Note, due to the talent shortage in China and people move about from team to team, especially in those rapidly growing tech companies, you can easily go through 2 reorg during your negotiation. So there'll be repetitive works. Sometimes things have been agreed on will have to be discussed again. So budget enough time for negotiation. Number 7, during the price negotiation, be prepared for rounds of haggle, which starts from asking for free products. I'm not joking. The Western negotiation concept of, excuse my language, piece of point is not very well respected. So don't get offended and just keep on going. Push for it. One thing you definitely want to spend more time on is to negotiate suppliers' payment terms. Paying suppliers in Chinese companies is at the bottom priority. So make sure you negotiate payment terms, penalties for late payments to protect yourself. Number 8, after all these hurdles, your Chinese customer want to place an order. Hooray! Well, the heartbeat only just started. In order to combat corruptions, a lot of companies have very strict rules for supplier selection and tendering process. For example, even if you are the only one in the entire world providing a certain solution, the company will still want to release the tender invite two other companies to bid. Sometimes this burden falls on the supplier. I call it the transparent bureaucracy. Okay, so these are the things we see every day. Are you tired and already confused? Well, I don't blame you. But it might be easier to prepare and manage if you understand what's behind all this. I will try. Obviously, we want to talk about why all these differences. To start with, management style and hierarchical structure in Chinese companies. With the influence of hundreds of years of feudal dynasty and Confucian philosophy, this is very common still. The older person should automatically receive respect from the younger, the senior from the junior. The manager should be seen as a type of elder figure who expects and receives loyalty, obedience from their colleagues. In return, the manager is expected to take a holistic interest in the well-being of these colleagues. Because of this, companies will have very complicated hierarchical structure, and state-owned companies even more rigid. Okay, normally as an employee, you are expected to learn to thrive in this kind of setup. If you want your manager to hear you out, listen to them first and carry out your duties and best of your ability to do what's expected. No matter how brilliant your ideas are, if you don't do your duty humbly and make your superior look good in the public eye or in their superior, you will never gain their trust. You will never build a relationship with them. This is the priority surviving in Chinese companies. I think this is quite common in Japan and Korea as well. So surely my colleagues will confirm later on. However, I have noticed that based on companies based in first-tier cities, especially those tech and creative companies, they tend to have much flatter structure recently. It's changing. Okay. A somewhat connected concept is the face factor. It's widespread in China. In the Chinese society, it's very common that losing face tend to be avoided. So losing face is just feeling embarrassed in front of others. And it's a big issue. For example, during a meeting, you will notice that some of the lower ranking employees will say, yes, okay, so quickly that it doesn't mean that they understand what you are requiring or you are asking. It only means that in order to not losing face, sometimes it means that in order to not losing face in front of the public, they will say yes and then find out details from their colleagues later on after the meeting. So my experience is when there's different rankings in the meeting, we try to stay high level. We only talk about things that not very crucial. This is not very productive. So after these kind of meetings, we'll always have to set up follow-up meetings with similar ranking employees or lower ranking employees to discuss, for example, spec sheet, data evaluation, things like that. And then make sure they understand everything and let them to report to their superior. Okay. Here's something else interesting I have to mention, but maybe hard to understand. In Chinese business culture, there's also something embedded in it. It's personal connections. It's crucial and it's based on loyalty, modesty, courtesy, solidarity, things like that. So it's not who you know, it's who you successfully gained trust with or from. Chinese business people often seek long-term relationships. Establishing this kind of relationship is not easy. It includes formal, informal meetings, as well as home visits, tea times, invitation to sport events, long dinners and drinks and stuff like that. But it's worth it because having this kind of relationship or connections often helps you to go through the 8 points or 8 hurdles I mentioned in the beginning much quicker. Now, the most exciting part, decision making. So do we have a deal or not? Well, the frustrating thing is a lot of times decisions are not collective, are actually made collectively by all the relevant people after multiple meetings, long time consideration. During these meetings and considerations, they will consider all stakeholders' face factors, impact on personal connections, long-term social perspectives, or local government policies, etc., all sorts of variables before they get to the point of things like market opportunity or consumer appeals. So, of course, you can argue that there are always superstar CEOs will make transparent, straightway decisions for you. But there you go. Okay. Now, when we talk about Chinese business culture, I think we cannot ignore the Generation XYZ factor. Basically, knowing where the decision makers come from and then how they grew up will help you to understand who they are and why they do this. I want to focus on these generations because the following generations, because they play a major role in our business world now. So the generations who were born in the 60s and before, and then the ones that are around the 70s, and then the ones who are the reform and opening policy generation. Normally they born after, so they were born after the 80s. Right, majority of the older generation lived through a very difficult childhood. No food, no clothes, no shoes, no modern education. So people tend to help each other to struggle through life. They lean on collective effort, aim to achieve collective benefit rather than self-fulfilling goals. Majority of the top management in China still live by this. And the people who were born in the 70s, this generation, they actually learned to work competitively. This is the first generation started to work in multinationals, and they are more flexible and then apolitical. These are the people right now in the mid to top level management. And now we have those people who were born in the 80s. They witnessed the birth of internet, all the things. They're optimistic. They were exposed to rapidly developed China, and experienced all these sorts of events, ideas, which offered them a relatively sophisticated opinion. And they are the generation started to have the sense of self-fulfillment. They are the ones actually witnessed the massive improvement in the society, in the Chinese society. So they are a lot more patriotic. And then these are the generation right now dominant mid-level management. So as the older generation retiring, the more confident, self-fulfilling generation moving up, then the decision-making process might become more transparent and market-oriented, or even we can say more familiar to the Western idea. Maybe we can find a different business culture even forming. And everything I told you just now, the 8 points, will become obsolete in 5 to 10 years' time. So things in China are evolving fast. So some of the things I believe are quite unique to Chinese business culture, and some of the places, some of them, and I think I explained where they originated. I hope, and I'm sure it's something that it would take many hours to talk through over beers, or even when you visit China, we can talk about it face to face. So I hope this helps. Thank you. And over to you, Michael.
Thank you so much, Zhao. That was really fascinating. And I must say that some parts of, especially the 8 points at the beginning, it kind of felt like complete chaos to me. But clearly, you've learned your way to control that chaos. Lots of interesting things, and I already saw that we have a lot of questions coming in, so we're going to try to get them later on. But just a very quick one now, before I forget. I mean, you mentioned at some point that Wechat has basically overtaken email as a means of sort of business communication, and we've heard about that here and there. But I mean, is it really true, or is this slightly exaggerated? I'm just curious.
No, it's definitely true. WeChat took over emails for sure, and then the reason people rely on WeChat is the supposing they are always on factor. So WeChat has this implication to people that if you WeChat them, they are available, they will reply to you. So because of the fast-pacing business environment, people will expect their suppliers or their counterpart to be always on, so they rely on WeChat. And we actually find people reply on WeChat much more efficient and quicker than emails. And we always form WeChat groups on projects, and we send through data sheet, evaluation results, demo videos via WeChat, so they can share within the company group faster, and then people will receive the message instantly. So we think it's an effective way. Yes.
Fascinating. Well, listen, I think I need to finally download WeChat in that case. And, maybe we here in the West might also, spend a little bit less time on emails. Who knows? Maybe that's the way. Well, listen, Zhao, thank you again very much. Please stay around, and we're going to bring you for the Q&A later on. But coming up next, we have Alicia Thompson from our Tokyo office. Welcome, Alicia. Could you give us a quick introduction and then tell us about Japan?
Yep, thank you, Michael. My name is Alicia Thompson, and I'm a senior project manager here at Intralink's Tokyo office. So this is my 6th year at Intralink, and I've had experience across a number of sectors, starting from semiconductors, intellectual property, retail, and most recently, medtech and life sciences. So I was born here in Japan and grew up here speaking Japanese. So I like to say that I have an insider's perspective. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what it's like to do business here in Japan, but first some history to give a bit of background. So as you know, Japan is an island country that was closed off from the rest of the world until the mid-1850s. It has a very long recorded history in comparison to countries like the US. It's a homogeneous society, which has led to it having a very high context culture. This means that Japan has its own social cues and customs that may be hard to pick up for those not used to the culture. So, for example, in a meeting, if someone says that would be difficult, everyone who's familiar with Japan knows that this means no. But if you're not familiar with the culture, you may think there's still opportunity, and you might press on to find out how to make it less difficult when everyone else in the room knows that you've just been told to basically go away. Further, because of its history, Japan can be risk averse. So it can be said that Japanese companies can be wary of working with companies outside of Japan, as they don't know who they can trust, because there's no trust relationship, and they're going to be they're going to be extra careful. So Japanese companies want to cultivate a trust relationship with you first, and they will appreciate taking the time in building that trust. So, for example, a supplier could often be chosen over price. So let me illustrate this further to show how working with a Japanese customer may look like by referring to a former client as a case study, where there are examples of how Japanese companies and our clients differ in the way they approach business. Our clients are typically from the US, UK, or the EU. And I'll also introduce two different decision-making processes that are common in Japan as I go through my examples. So to set the scene, we were dealing with a Japanese company that was likely to become our client's first customer in Japan. The problem at hand was the whole process of getting to a deal took far longer than the client had expected. So what was taking so long? First of all, the client had an atypical business model, which took time for the Japanese customer to understand. In Japan, there are certain business models that are more familiar than others in certain industries. So if you bring anything new, the other side needs time to digest the new information. Secondly, the client asked that we set a meeting with the CEO on the other side in hopes of speeding up the decision-making process. This is quite a common request, as you can imagine. However, in Japan, the groundwork is usually being done by project leads, and therefore the CEO is typically not directly involved. In fact, in most cases, a senior executive is actually the one signing off, and the CEO may not be aware of the details of the project. So what is happening is the project lead is gathering the details of our proposal, and then once they have digested the information and feel comfortable to take it upstairs, or they take it to the senior executive to get approval. So rather than asking to meet the CEO in hopes of getting things moving quickly, you really should be putting your effort in gaining the trust of the project lead. Here, I'd like to introduce a common decision-making process in Japan called nemawashi. So I would like for you to imagine for a moment digging around a tree or a plant so you can relocate it elsewhere safely. The ne in nemawashi means the roots of this plant that you're going to be relocating. And mawashi of nemawashi is coming from sort of the image of digging around this plant. So when we apply this to business, you are going around or laying the groundwork by speaking to all the parties involved ahead of time to avoid any surprises in meetings. You are getting the buy-in of everyone involved beforehand. So the official meeting may actually look more like a show to confirm what's already been decided behind the scenes. So you also don't want to be bringing surprises to the meetings and making sure you work closely with the project lead in preparation for a meeting that may involve some key people. So let me go back to my story about my client. So at one point, our client got a bit frustrated at how long the approval process was taking, and out of desperation proposed making a take it or leave it offer. We counseled the client not to take this drastic action, but to let us talk to the customer. So we scheduled a meeting with the Japanese company to explain our client's timeline and get more clarity on the customer's decision-making process. We anticipated the Japanese customer was simply expecting to have more time to discuss internally. And in fact, this was the case. And once we confirmed this, we were able to explain to the client that everything was on track and the client was satisfied. So here's another decision-making process in Japan that could be taking time. This is called ringi. And ringi is the process of getting sign off from everyone before making a decision. So basically, this is passing around a piece of paper, and this could be a proposal or a contract on which managers will affix their seal or hanko, which we call it, which indicates their approval. So as you can imagine, this is going to take time to physically pass around the piece of paper to every relevant person in the office. So that's ringi. So when you are doing business in Japan, say you're trying to get another meeting with someone you met, a technical discussion, or even starting your negotiation process, things may take time. Everyone is involved and everything is done very carefully. It's a slowly but surely approach. However, you can be sure that when the other side says they are ready, you're going to know that they're going to be ready 100% because they have done their homework and gotten everyone's approval. So when you do have a meeting with a Japanese company, you also want to come into the meeting with a level of professionalism by showing you have done your homework as well. Basically, you don't want to be preparing your slides in the taxi on your way to the meeting. Perhaps I should also add that Japanese meetings can get very technical quickly. Questions like, how does it actually work, are very common. We understand that because most of our clients are startups, their product may still be at the prototype or demo level, and the presentation deck may not contain all the technical details. But I would suggest that when dealing with companies in Japan, do your homework, be prepared, know the company that you're going to be talking to, and know your material too. So to conclude my story, we ended up getting the deal with this customer, and this became the company's first deal in the Japanese market. So in the end, a success. So I hope I was able to give a bit of a glimpse into what doing business in Japan may look like. Thank you for your time.
Fantastic, Alicia. Thank you so much. We'll, again, lots of questions to follow up on this, but I think it's a great introduction. Quick one, just before we move on, while it's still fresh in my head.
Yep.
You know, as a sales guy by day myself, right, I usually do try to, you know, speak to the decision maker as soon as possible, as soon as I can. Mm-hmm. Now, if, as you say, they are potentially many decision makers, right? Lots of different mm-hmm. people involved in that process. I mean, how do you even begin to manage that?
Yeah, so you're going to see, you know, multiple meetings. It's just the way of life, I guess. You're going to be talking to the technical people. You're going to be talking to the executive, obviously doing many meetings with the project lead, and then you're going to have meetings with the legal people. So it's just, I think, you just need to anticipate having multiple meetings to get down to that deal. So yeah, I think that's how things are going to work.
Got it. Understood. Okay, well, thank you, Alicia. Please stay on. And now for our final talk, we're going to move to Jason. Jason dialing in from Seoul, South Korea. Jason, thank you for joining. Thanks for your patience waiting for your turn. Now, please tell us a little bit about yourself and about Korean business culture.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to my colleagues, Zhao and Alicia, for all those great insights. Yeah, let me just quickly introduce myself. So my name is Jason Huang. I'm here based at the Intralink Seoul office. I've been working for Intralink for a little more than a year and a half now as a project manager. I'm originally from the US and came over to Korea, and I've been living in Korea for 10 years now. And here at Intralink, I've worked across many different in different sectors, ranging from intellectual property to consumer electronics to connected car technology. So yeah, I think one of the things I wanted to talk about today when it comes to doing business in Korea is how highlighting one of the one of the key differences between Korea and maybe other countries such as the US or countries in Europe. Now, I think although Korea has come a long way to become this sort of modern and innovative country that it is today, many traditional aspects of this, for lack of a better term, old Korea still exists And, it can be quite different to what people in, the US or countries in Europe are accustomed to, especially if one's never had the chance to actually live here in Korea. And I think these differences between Korea and other parts of the world can be quite evident, especially when doing business with Korean companies. I'd say one of these differences is in the way Koreans just interact with each other in both social and professional settings. And I'd say, the foundation for this, lies in an ideology that's shaped Korea, not just, in the past, but, in present day as well. And, this ideology is Confucianism. I think Zhao, highlighted that when she discussed, China, and, Korea is very similar in a way that Confucianism has a very, great influence in Korean society and culture. I think there are a number of Confucianist principles that, have great influence here. I think the one that, I think it can be argued that the one having the greatest influence, is this emphasis on maintaining sort of interpersonal relationships in a hierarchical, top-down manner. And in fact, for this, in Korea, a person's age actually plays a very, very important role in how relationships are maintained. So, the old saying, respect your elders, it has a profound meaning in many countries outside of Korea. But I'd say actually in Korea, it has a much more, deeper and profound meaning. So this Confucianist principle of age and, the importance it plays in maintaining this sort of top-down relationship tradition, it didn't just, come out of nowhere. In fact, this principle is instilled in, all Koreans here from the day that they're born, all the way into adulthood. And it really shapes their lives at home and, in school. And, going beyond that, for Korean males, this is instilled even further as, all males in Korea are required to undergo 18 months of mandatory military service. And, I think you can imagine how, in the military, following the directions of your superiors, adhering to a strict senior to junior code, the whole respect your elder, phrase is very much emphasized to all soldiers, in the military. And I'd say, many companies and workplaces here are not much different. In fact, the way coworkers interact with each other and the way companies sort of run their operations have this Confucianist principle ingrained within, where a traditional top-down hierarchy and way of doing things is instilled. A company's structure here is very much like a ladder system where you have, you can have your CEO at the top, VPs right below the CEO, and you may have a few department heads, and then after that, team heads, and then senior managers, so on. And I think when doing business with Korean companies, it's very important to understand all of this. And along with all these Confucianist principles, in order to build good relationships with companies and find successful, opportunities in the market. I can share, one example of when all of this became very evident, and having understanding of this, respect your elder principle became very useful when doing business, here. And this was a time when I was conducting business negotiations on behalf of one of our clients. The client was a UK company based in the UK that developed a solution, for the IP industry. And we were at the time negotiating with one of the largest corporates in Korea. So to give you a little bit of background, we were negotiating the final price and the fine details for a statement of work. Now, leading the negotiations for the customer side was this sort of a senior level manager. I'd say he had been with the company for close to 20 years. And him and I, we'd been going back and forth for, I'd say, close to 2 weeks on this SOW. Now, as we're wrapping up and coming to a close, I had sent him the final version of the SOW via email. His side reviewed it, and he gave the verbal okay on all the terms. So we were quite happy when we received this verbal agreement and thought we had closed the deal. But then the next day he calls, and he requested that we resend the exact same final version of this SOW, along with all these other details that we had actually previously discussed in email chains beforehand. And he asked that I resend this email in a completely new email chain and send it to his director, his immediate superior. And he was very specific in his instructions. He said that when sending it over to his director, it should, in the to box, when sending an email, it should only be the director's email, and everyone else, him included, and other of his colleagues that were involved in this project, they should all be CC'd. Now, I think if you first hear this or hear this request, you may think, this is quite unnecessary. That manager himself, he could have just sent the SOW, and all those fine details in an internal email to his director. And, assuming that they're in the same, office, maybe they share, desks right next to each other. He could have, verbally just went over all these, those fine details with his director. But the main point is, in Korea, this action of sending an email directly to this director, it's not something that's pointless. It's not pointless at all. In fact, it was a formality. And it's a formality that was indicating that, we recognize and acknowledge his position within the company's hierarchy. And we are asking for his direct sign off on the SOW, even though we already got the verbal confirmation beforehand. So in essence, we were acknowledging that, this whole time we were communicating just with his junior, and now we're respecting him as the senior or, elder, in this case, within the department. And, this action, it wasn't just meant to satisfy the director, actually. It was also meant to satisfy that senior manager as well, so that he could maintain, good standing within his company and maintain that important junior-senior level of relationship, with his team. And, when all was said and done, we sent the email over to the director. He thanked us. 2 days later, we received his blessing. We got his signature, and we wrapped up the deal. So, everything was worth it in the end. So, I think, yeah, that was one of the, stories and some of the insights that I wanted to share on, doing business in Korea. And I hope you find that everyone that's listening out there finds it very helpful. And thank you everyone for your time.
Jason, thank you very much. Very good story. And I think an important takeaway from that is that, you're not only there to sort of respect and suck up to the director, to the most senior guy, but you're also making sure that the working level, the project lead, is someone that you also show respect, and you help him, with his standing in his group, in his team. So that's very interesting, and I think we don't always think in those ways here. We have about 15 minutes to get over the Q&A. But before we jump to that, just Jason, one tiny little question and a follow-up. I remember during my time in Korea, very often when you go into a meeting, especially with those bigger companies, it isn't always obvious, who the decision maker in the room is, even by looking at their titles and even by looking at, where they sit in the room and all those things. So from your experience, when you go into a meeting like that, how do you know who you need to impress?
That's a great question, Michael. I think you're right. You hit it spot on. Korean titles, they don't always translate into English very well. One example is the Korean word sangmu. I think if you look it up in the dictionary, it can translate to either a director or vice president, VP. But in Korea, sangmu is actually a very high level senior figure who is a decision maker. So very, very important. And in meetings, a lot of the times, I've experienced this. The most senior level person in a meeting might not be the one actually leading the meeting. He or she may actually be quite silent, may not even say a word at all. And instead, the person leading the meeting is someone who maybe, I don't know, a working level person that speaks great English, or it's just someone that the senior level person has just brought in to lead the meeting, follow his instructions. But I think so. In Korea, usually when you begin a meeting, there's an exchange of business cards. So usually, looking over the business cards is the first telltale sign of knowing who's in the room, what position they are. And it is, yes, of course, quite important that if you see someone who's a very, a high level figure, maybe a C-level person, and they're in the room and they're not saying, they're not talking much at all, it's very important to be aware that that person is there. He may be, quiet, but he definitely is listening in and will be making, informed, decisions on his side after the meeting's over. And also, there could be situations where, for example, you're in a meeting room with 3 people, and just so happens all 3 people have the exact same title on their business card. So, in that situation, you may wonder, like, okay, so who's the actual senior figure among the 3? And usually the fallback is, I alluded to it earlier, is person's age. So most of the time, the oldest person among the 3 will be the most senior figure, and will be leading the or could be leading the discussion, but also will have the most highest level of say among the 3 figures in the room.
Got it. Thank you, Jason. That's really good, really thorough explanation. Thank you very much for that. Well, listen, I feel like I've learned a lot from you guys, but also not nearly enough. So let's do a little bit of Q&A-ing now. We have a lot of questions coming in from the audience. So let's bring back the rest of the speakers. Thanks, guys, for sticking around. Now, let's start with this one, which I think is quite popular in the chat, and it's really the elephant in the room. To be quite honest, and one of the reasons why we're even doing this virtual event today, namely COVID-19. How has that changed things in terms of sort of doing business in Asia for you guys on the ground? Alicia, maybe start with you. Do you have any sort of comments, thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think there are a few things that I see changing in Japan. So I think there was a question about hankos. And we do see this changing digitally. And I think we're in the process of making this digital. So that's great news for Japan, definitely. There's been a bit of uptick in use of LinkedIn, especially for people who have international positions. So that's great. And there's also a Japanese version of LinkedIn called 8 that we've also been using quite a bit. And we've been using that quite avidly as well. And then we've now known that first meetings don't necessarily have to be face-to-face. People are now willing to, they've made that switch over to Zoom or MS Teams. They're willing to do that online. So that's great. And then fax. I don't know where fax is going, but hopefully COVID's gonna, maybe it's the death of fax. We'll see how that goes. But I think we'll be using less of fax. So yeah, those are some of the changes I see in Japan with COVID.
Very interesting, Alicia. Zhao, do you have anything sort of that jumps out at you in China in terms of COVID and how things changed?
Yeah, sure. So believe it or not, China only had 2 or 3 months of a complete shutdown and everything went back to usual. So in terms of general business culture, nothing's changed. But if we talk about international connections, Chinese companies, if they want an outreach, they are more acquainted to the idea of virtual conferencing. Before they wouldn't accept virtual conferencing. Now, if you go to companies, they will have a setup ready for virtual conferencing and then talking to people outside of China. So that's an improvement, I think.
Very interesting. No, indeed, I agree with that. And what is also quite interesting is I think it plays into what we discussed earlier, which is sort of email, being a little bit downplayed, and everything sort of happening on WeChat, which sort of also means that, if you're not in China, if you're trying to do business with your Chinese partners and customers, from Europe, from the US, you send them emails all the time and, hey guys, what's going on? How are things? It might not be very effective, to be honest with you. Is that sort of what you're feeling as well?
Yeah, the thing is, when you send emails to people, they don't reply. You always wonder why they're not replying, and have they seen it? Are they thinking about? But if you send a message over WeChat, if they don't reply, they're not interested.
Right.
If they do reply, even with okay, or even with let me see what's going to happen, then they're acting on it. So that's the difference. Yeah.
No, absolutely agreed. Jason, over to you. Any sort of highlights in terms of how things are in Korea in the context of COVID-19?
Yeah, I think actually it's quite similar to what's going on in China and Japan. I remember traditionally in Korea, people always did face-to-face meetings. Certain actions in a meeting, especially a first meeting, such like, for example, the exchange of business cards was very, very important in Korea. But, due to COVID-19, things had to change. I think a lot of people in the beginning found it quite awkward to do virtual meetings over Zoom or MS Teams. But I think now I see it's very, very common, and people are really used to it. And it's just people they had to learn to adapt, and I think people here have adapted well, and that's I think the situation right now. Got it. Okay, well, listen, very interesting, and obviously it's an unfolding situation, so we need to kind of stay on top of it, and it might change, but glad to hear that people are more open to sort of conducting business remotely. Now let's move on. There's a question that actually it's sort of an amalgamation of a couple of different questions that were asked in the chat here. But let's put it this way. Give me your view on how important relationships are in doing business in your geography, and also connected to that. If you don't have a relationship really with your customer just yet, I mean, you got to start somewhere. What do? Do you cold call? Do you, so what are some of these sort of methods to, if you don't have a relationship yet, to kickstart it? Zhao, would you like to maybe start with on this one?
Yeah, sure. So I would normally divide this by tech or traditional business. So in tech, everything is getting flatter and flatter. And overall, cold call still works in China. And if you cold call them on their mobile phone, you add them on WeChat, most of the time they'll accept you. So you can message them on WeChat. So on the tech world, it's getting flatter and flatter. The solution and the quality of the solution speaks for itself. So relationship or not, as long as your solution helps tech companies to forge forward, then you're in. So traditional business is a different story. It's very much still based on connections, relationships, and who they're comfortable doing business with. and whether they trust you with the business. So this very different dynamic landscape. Yeah.
Very interesting. And I think you're right that probably, there's never an easy answer to this type of question, because it will, be different by sector, by industry, et cetera, et cetera. But interesting, overall insight from you. Thank you for that. Jason, would you like to add your 5 cents? The same question.
Sure. I think cold calling definitely works. We do it, and that's the first step in building a relationship with a potential customer. But I think, and Zhao alluded to this earlier in her talk, but this sort of the way people in Korea sort of form interpersonal relationships. It's not just at the business level. There's a lot of sort of behind the scenes stuff, such as going out to dinners, getting a drink together. All those still exist and are quite common today. Of course, the technology or the solution or product needs to be great, but there if there's two competing solutions or products, for example, and they're quite have the same value proposition, but the one salesperson for company A has a better interpersonal relationship than the company B's salesperson with the prospect. The prospect will most likely definitely go with the company's A solution, just because they have that interpersonal relationship already.
They feel more comfortable. Yeah.
Comfortable. Yeah.
Understood. Okay. All right. Well, Alicia, just very quickly, do you have anything to add to this one in the context of Japan?
Yeah. Sure. So I talked about, working closely with the project lead. And I think this goes for, maybe doing a quick call after you send an email just to say, hey, sent you an email. Do you have any thoughts? Or just building that relationship is going to lead to more trust as well. So yeah, having sort of a personal relationship with that project lead is always going to help.
Yeah. No, indeed. I think that's what it really is about, right? Getting closer to the person who's doing all the heavy lifting and helping them out as much as you can. And that just naturally builds a relationship, and then you can keep coming back to them and they will keep coming back to you. Very interesting. Very cool. Thank you guys for that. Well, let's do one last question very quickly. And that is about, I think, Alicia, you mentioned that in your talk that, the Japanese corporates, they tend to be quite risk averse. And I was just curious, like, how do you guys, Zhao and Jason, how do you see Chinese corporates and Korean corporates? Where do you see them on that risk aversion spectrum? Jason, would you like to tell us first?
Sure. Korean corporates, they're very, very thorough. They will do their, due diligence to make sure that there's, no risk or very, very little risk, when it comes to a certain opportunity. So it can be, the process can be very lengthy. There's a lot of steps involved in these large corporates, their internal processes. So, something that may, seem like should take maybe like a day or two, actually may be kind of, expanded over, a week, some maybe even 2 weeks. So, I think, we would just have to understand, and that's how Korea works.
Got it. I think, understood on that. I think, another aspect of risk aversion is also like how likely are people to actually, go with the new sort of groundbreaking technology, right? Are they going to sort of invest their time into, okay, we want to launch this new product, this new technology as the first in the world, right? Or, well, we're going to wait maybe for companies in other countries to do this first, and then we're just going to make an excellent improved copy of it, right? So there's an aspect of that as well. I mean, Zhao, do you feel? I feel like China is currently seen quite a bit as a country, as a market that kind of turned from the follower, right, to actually an innovator, and I believe that risk aversion or lowered risk aversion may have something to do with it. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, always, I would also address this by dividing companies into different categories. We mentioned superstar CEOs. Depends on their personality. The company will be more risk-taking or not. And then state-owned companies, they almost never take risks. They always do things with very, very thorough investigation. And then you have the tech companies, and if they are innovators, they will take the risks. Yeah.
Got it. Understood. Well, listen, guys, we're out of time, it looks like. I don't know when that happened. It was just so nice listening to you. But I think this is a good time and a good place to wrap up. Thank you very much to all of you, to our speakers. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you also to our fantastic audience for your questions and for your participations and for your kind comments as we went through this. There are undoubtedly many more things that could be said about Asian business cultures, but hopefully this was sort of a useful and thought-provoking introduction, a session that perhaps sparks a broader discussion moving forward. Please do keep in touch with us if you'd like to explore this, or maybe you have a business case in Asia that you need some help with to crack. Let us know. Our emails will be on the screen in a little bit. So again, thank you very much for your attention today, and goodbye for now. Take care.